We're getting close to the end of our semester here. We got a lot to cover, but first and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a little bit of information. I've been receiving messages and I've been helping you guys create your code for your assignments. That's awesome. Um, I will let you guys know that upcoming next week we will be having an exam on JavaScript. I know we haven't had that many quizzes, and this last quiz for this past week was a little bit obscure in the sense that I didn't review it prior to posting, and some of the information was a little bit iffy. So I went back and I consolidated the grades and compensated for the issue or the misreading. I can see how some of the questions were a little unfair. So I took note of that. I made the announcement, the corrections, and I believe people are going to be credited for that for those two. Like I mentioned before, week next week, Thanksgiving week, we will have an exam on JavaScript. It'll be short. It'll be about 25 questions, and I will review the questions prior to posting the exam, and hopefully y'all can do a little bit better. I know this past quiz was a little tough, but I will review the questions prior and make sure that they're aligned with the questions from the book, so that we can have a better result and you all can have a better understanding of the material prior to taking the exam as well. So I'll be posting as well at the end of next before the week's end. I will be posting a little itinerary, a little agenda of what you can expect for that exam, and it's not going to be much. I know there's a lot of information on Java, but the way I see things is in Java, most of it is hands-on. The terminology and stuff like that, you can get away with some of the basic information or like your operators and stuff like that. But I believe the meat of JavaScript is in the actual coding itself and the comprehension of how to use functions and methods and calling out all that stuff. So we're gonna get right down to lesson 23. It's one of my favorite chapters because it's a conditional chapter. It involves conditions and it involves loops. We're gonna go ahead and scratch the book just a little bit, but and the upcoming assignments will be completely in line with what we're doing this week. And we're gonna do two assignments, two activities for this lab. I'm gonna give you an extended amount of time to do it to compensate for this week and for the upcoming week. That way, you guys have plenty of time to be working on these upcoming assignments. It'll be uh, two separate submissions. Well, on one submission, but two separate activities that we're going to be working on, and I'll explain a little bit more on that um, uh, in the next video, which will be the lab video instructional. But for now, let's go ahead and review just a little bit of information. Like I said, most of this is a self-explanatory because, of course, the book is is trying to be a little bit explicit what it's trying to explain, and I'll just go over some of the information, things to look out for, and whatnot. So, the homework this week, the homework from the book is not required, although I do generally ask you guys so you guys can picture some of the stuff that's happening while you're coding in JavaScript. That it is well aware. I mean, you're well aware of how things function, and of course, doing with the flow of the loops and the conditions and the infinite loops and stuff like that. Um, so, without further ado, let's just go over real quick on lesson 23, and then we'll continue with anything else. All right, and here commencing with the statement else if else statements are while do loops. Um, Very simple, and I like to say that it's simple in the sense that it's kind of logical to commence one. It's basically doing a judgment test on variables. Um, and so the if statement generally gives you a choice, more than one choice, particularly. The amount of choices you can have in an if statement, it's I can't say it's infinite, but I can say generally say that if you can make many if statements to prove if something is correct or incorrect or valid or invalid. So let's use this particular phrase within the book. It says if the phone rings, there's choice, either answer it or not to answer it. So so that we set a condition when the first condition is that the phone rings. And so here we can put and create an if statement. So if the phone rings, you have two choices to answer it or to not answer it. Therefore, we start opening up our arguments, um, our test arguments in parentheses, and then whenever we want to validate that the answer, if it's equal to if by phoning ringing, if the phone rings, what do you want it to do? So first action would be found in these curly brackets, and then you can make a separate statement saying otherwise if not, if the phone doesn't ring, oh well, if the phone rings, okay, then you can make a statement, answer it. Then within your answer, you can say you've answered it, right? And then otherwise, you don't answer it, right? So hopefully that was the book is not a very good illustration. I apologize for that, but we're trying to make do with the best we can here. Although we can go back and use the W3 and I can create a better understanding of the yes statement. But basically, it's what it states. It says it tests out logic using operators. Here we have a double equal sign. So double equal signs are used in arguments. So your arguments is if A equals 1. So A equals is how you create an argument. So it can be less than, greater than, less than, equal to, or greater than, equal to, or equal. It's it tests. It's a test. So that you test out with your double equal if it's equal to. We talked about the conditionals. The conditionals is I like to use is either equal to or not equal to with the exclamation mark and the equal sign, or greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. I typically don't like to use less than or greater than because it sets you up for a blind spot. For instance, if you want to create a a dual um, a dual if statement that you want a number between 1 and 10, but using these is not going to use 1 or not going to use 10, so you have that many less integers in between your function or your argument that you're going to be able to sort from, if you can imagine that. So if we were to rewrite it and say we want a number between 1 and 10 and can include 1 and 10, so that's where you use your greater than or less than but equal to. So that little equal to gives you a wider range of in your argument statements. All right. So there's a couple of other operators that are pretty cool. Like we mentioned before, if you want to pick a number between 1 and 10, you can do two separate statements. But there's a particular operator that you can use to differentiate. So you can use an O operator and that's used with a shift and then the one next to the curly brackets, the shift in that one, and it's the two upright lines. You have to have two of them together to create an OR. So if you want to create an if statement that is either this is equal to this or this is equal to this, then you create your argument. I mean your function to validate that argument or to create a particular um, a function. I like to use function because from here it's creating a function of doing something. Something is missing. You're creating an alert, or you're creating, or you're setting something in motion afterwards. So you're validating. First you validate, and then you create something in motion. So using your OR operator is also important. We talked about how about if you want a number between 1 and 10, but or 20 and 50, and so you're collecting two arguments, but you're differentiating it's by either or, either this or this. So you're giving a choice. The next one, the ampersand is called AND. This is setting two conditions to meet, and if one of the values is not equal to your argument, then nothing happens. They both have to be equal to your argument. It has to be validated. So if you want to say, I want to pick a number between 1 and 10, but also, has to be between 1 and 5. I'm just spitballing. So if your number is between 1 and 10, you can have it do one argument, but we have 1 and 10, and then also between 1 and 5, then it creates a completely separate function, or in this particular case, it says alert right there. All right. So, there's also something else you can use, very, very popular, possibly the most popular of all the arguments here when you're creating an if statement. So you're judging an argument if A equals to 1, then you set something in motion, you create a box that says found 1. I found 1. So, but if A equals to 0, then you create an else statement. And these two are separated by a semicolon. So you finish your first function here. And then it sets the A back to, it sets the A to 0. But if it isn't 1, any other number, anything else is going to be incorrect value. Right? So incorrect value, and then it's going to spitball, A back because you're using that variable again. So hope that kind of made you understand just a little bit more. If not, then no worries. Set additional resources may help you out. All right. So if and else, very important. This upcoming section, I believe, is also one of the homework assignments. I'm not too keen on having you actually do the homework assignments, but I do want you to take this line by line, the actual code for testing multiple conditions using if and else, and see how it operates. Like I said, if you go line by line, you can actually tell how a particular argument is being validated, whether it proves it by promoting the function within the curly brackets, or continuing into something other completely different argument that proved it otherwise, and so you something else. So The testing of the hour of the day. If it's less than 10, then it says good morning. But if it says more than 14, it says good afternoon. Or if it says more than 17 hours, it says good evening. Um, or otherwise, no argument there. Otherwise, if there is nothing to compare it with, then it'll say good day. Um, so that's how that works. Mm-hmm. Your scripting is the same. The second sample, this is almost the same thing as the first sample, with the exception of using the now feature. Using the now gets, current information from the web, um, or the computer clock. A switch statement is almost like an if statement, but it reverts to something else. It's also a logical. Uh, there you go. It's also a logical. And doing a switch, it's um, it's a case scenario. It's when you cannot or you do not have any arguments that are presently visible. But for instance, if you have something written that needs to be also validated. For instance, let's see right here. If it tests a particular text by looking for if the word in a particular ID matches that, if it an element ID was text was inserted and it matches next, then it uses that to judge if it makes any sense. I know it's a little. We hardly use switch case scenarios. Very, very solemn. It's mostly else ifs or try catch statements, and try catch is a little bit different. But if when we get to loops, then that will be more relevant. But um, also, if you want to finish off a condition, you use a break, and you use break when you want to retest it again. When you have each case to skip onto either the next, because otherwise you're gonna go if the first argument settles your validation, then the break function ends it. It doesn't go to the next case. If the first thing satisfies it, or whichever of these satisfy it, then the break finishes it off and doesn't go off onto the next. Uh, when you do an if is it tests first with the first one, and then the second one, and then the third one. Switch case does not do that. Switch case is either or. It's either or, one or the other, and you typically finish off the script that it's working on by using break. Loops is very, very cool. I like loops because um, they make functions easier. When you're doing an array and you're doing a search during an array, or an array sort, or an array um, that things of that nature with arrays, it's very valuable to create loops. Um, in the list of the things that I would like to be implementing in for your projects, loops is not on the top priority of the list, but else if statements are. So I will base the upcoming lab assignments more on that end than rather than the loops. I will tell you, however, how a loop is created and how you can end a loop. So, all right. So a loop, all you do is when you want a repetition of a particular function, I'm gonna call this document right. I'm gonna call this a function because it creates something for you. But up here, it starts with a for because it's called for loop. But you're gonna immediately declare your variable I as 0. But until I equals, I mean, well, I take this back. For as long as I is less than 10, then I plus plus commands it to add itself. If it's 0, it goes on to the next integer. If it's 1, next full integer. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. For as long as it's less than 10, the plus plus will surmount on itself until the validation is sufficed, which the statement here is asking for it to be less than 10. For as long as I is less than 10, run I plus plus. So add 1 to itself. And then for as long as it does that, then I want you to write this. So this line and then the number of whatever variable I is, and then break means going to the next line. So what it's going to end up happening here is you're going to have 9 separate lines of code that say this line is starting with 1, starting and then continuing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way to 10. Well, not 10 because it does not have the equal sign underneath. It's just less than 10, so it'll go up to 9. And there you have it. Very obvious, very simple as well. Like I said, I don't see a use for this right here, right now, unless we're starting to work with sorting and searching, traversing through arrays. But even at then, I believe that's part of your advanced part of the programming, or even in Java, using Java or C# or C++ or any other type of programming language you're going to be going off into. HTML and CSS and JavaScript are very basic, so that's your entry-level programming that we're working with. Okay. Your for loops are very similar to your while loops. Very similar. So, but you can do this in the background of other loops. So that's why they call it while, because you can create a for loop, and then you can also nest a while loop that's happening while, as long as one's happening, the other one can be happening at the same time. And very seldom also do you use while loops. You do use a lot of for loops versus while loops, or do while loops. But also very self-explanatory, taking it by line for as long as the total is less than 10, and then you create your argument. Once it's validated, then you keep on adding 1 to your n variable, and so therefore you're going to have a total of all the added values of n. It's another fancy way of doing a loop for the same obvious reason. Here it gets a little bit more interesting and a little bit tricky because here you have to make sure that you have no other variables that interfere with whatever you use here. So you can use I, you can use and, you can use L, any other letter of the alphabet. But make sure you whatever you do use as far as your variable that you are comparing it with. For instance, if you have a total, so and then for as long as a total is et cetera, you're only going to use this text code. If you're gonna if it doesn't satisfy that, then you can create a separate else statement. But that's, like I said, that's evolved in the second half of your programming. Loops examples. Okay, so your lab assignment is very much similar to here on the second one. You can create an array, but for as long as you have an argument or you have well, to do while. So this is a very good argument. This is a very good like if statement. If so and so is not, uh, you're gonna, well, going back. So here in a do statement again is using however many variables that you have in an array, or how many objects you have in an array. For as many as you have in the array, then it'll do you know a particular function. So this is also fun. And then writing it in an ordered list. This is also very, very nifty. I like this. And that was pretty much it. Lesson 23. Once again, if you still have issues concerning this, please revert back to W3 Schools. There's a lot of information out there that'll help you, or even YouTube. There's videos on YouTube that'll give you just more in detail. Like I said, I'm just doing your overview so that you can go back and read the chapter for the sake of the quiz. Um, Next week, week 13, is a exam week based on 25 questions, multiple choice as they've been before. I will try to create a sample of what I'm going to be requesting or what to be looking at into for this upcoming exam. So, and then of course proofreading the exam questions prior to making them available next week.